Lovely. Thank you so much also to the organizers. This is ideal. It's almost magical the way this table appeared out of nowhere, out of thin air, which allows us now to have this interview. This interview on a very exciting topic, and then to engage in a discussion with you and to exchange our opinions and comments. This is going to be about new formats of collaboration enabled by technology. We just heard a very concrete example, haven't we, Anne? But also something that can be put into practice due to the fact that some years ago, and I think the older people in the audience are going to remember this. We had a pandemic that confused everything. It hit companies which weren't well prepared for this, weren't well prepared for remote work. It hit companies that were undergoing transformation processes. They were in the process of designing it, actually. So this was an economy, or rather an entire society within that transformation. Many of those transformations which were presented this morning, and what was very interesting is that this study that was carried out by my colleagues for the Ministry of Work that actually looked into that very question. What did the pandemic do to companies? What was the effect it had? How did it actually change existing processes of change? What was the influence it had? So we're going to have a dialogue today. We're going to present this study to you. About the two of us, this is my colleague, Ms. Anne Busch-Heitzmann, who has a doctorate in work sociology, the Wedding School of Science, on professional gender segregation, with stays at the Stanford University, the University of Tampere, DW in Berlin. She also worked in Hamburg as a professor for sociology, social inequality at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and now she's also working at a different institute, especially looking into the study which I mentioned earlier. We have all made our own personal experiences with these processes of change within the context of the COVID pandemic. Each and every one of us will have their own stories to tell. The colleagues in the back, I spoke to them earlier about our personal experiences. And what I find exciting, actually, is that many of those experiences which we made on an individual level, irrespective of the economic areas in which we work, do not just affect ourselves. Rather, it's you and me. We made our own experiences which are congruent with the experiences that other people have made, so it's a mass phenomenon. And you looked across industries what actually impacted people, how the pandemic changed the collaboration within companies. Maybe you could explain to us exactly what you looked at. I would love to. The parting point, well, the overall question was, of course, what are the changes in the world of work and what does it do to companies? You already mentioned that in your introduction. Ms. Kaufeld also mentioned it, the 4 big Ds of transformation on the labor market. That is in particular what we looked at, which of course is the digital and technological shift on the labor market. This leads to a massive change of work conditions, work processes, and new burdens, of course, new workloads. And the pandemic, of course, exacerbated the whole situation. It really pushed things forward. And we wanted to know what this did to companies, how they handled it, what chances, what risks this produced, and what it depended on. Let me explain it to you by the help of an example. IoT technologies, information and communication technologies expanded rapidly. This was promoted by the pandemic, and in one case, this of course created chances, new opportunities. It helped people with their work-life balance, but it also entailed some risks. For example, the demarcation lines between work and private life were kind of opened up. Things weren't quite as clear. If we conducted a survey with the people present in the audience, and if we asked them what do companies need to be able to do to get through this crisis successfully, I think many of them would say, well, you have to be adaptable. You need to adapt. This is a buzzword that has been created, such as others, in during the COVID pandemic. this is what happens in practice. It's easier said than done. So you actually looked at the practical level at different companies, how they reacted, how the different players reacted. So what do you think characterizes successful companies during the pandemic? Well, based on research, well, there are different concepts, certain traits of companies who determine whether they're resilient in crises or whether they're not as resilient, to what extent they can handle change. To get back to the example, IOK technologies, video conference calls, for instance, they have become a standard. Before the pandemic, that wasn't really done. So in certain companies, these video conference calls were perceived as an improvement of time sovereignty, but in other companies, on the other hand, this was perceived as a system of social control, an increase of the density of work, and there are certain properties of companies that make a difference. So at what point does this become something positive, and when is it actually an obstruction? So this is about the resilience of companies. This is similar for people. They're either more or less resilient. And the same goes for companies. They can be resilient or less so. The word resilience has also turned into a buzzword during the crisis, but this includes a lot. We're all familiar with the word resilience when we speak about personal resilience, the resilience of employees, resilience towards stress. And the replies on an individual level are often self-management, to feel self-determination, to take control over people's own work, really. Sovereignty, having that feeling of sovereignty. Self-efficacy, that is what Gina Glock is also going to tell us about. But what does this mean in the context of companies? What characterizes a resilient company? Well, it's not that different if you compare resilient companies to resilient individuals. Of course, you have the hard framework conditions. What are the financial capabilities? What's the wiggle room? What's the potential that the company has in order to start these transformation processes? And beyond that, what we heard in the previous talk, what's the work environment? What's that like? Is it a work environment which is open and flexible? So what kind of competencies do the employees have? Do they have a digital affinity? Are they open to new technology? Are they flexible? Can they handle changes flexibly? Can they develop individual solutions, And then the question comes up, are there structures in place that actually acknowledge those competencies that will then promote them? Further training, that was also something that we spoke about earlier. Is there a work organization that actually promotes further training? And at the end of the day, this is an interesting term, it's the organizational culture. Is it actually characterized by openness, through a feeling of belonging, respect, team cohesion? So when all of this comes together, all of those positive aspects, then this is a work environment that serves as a space for free development. You don't leave, this obviously doesn't mean that you leave employees on their own, just do whatever you want. We're out. But this is actually an interplay, and this is a double-edged sword, certainly. At the end, I also have to mention the individual relationships that mesh, network organizationally within the company. We know from network research, and to me, it is very important how many contact people I have in order to gain the required knowledge for my professional advancement, for instance. This works through my network. The same goes for companies. If companies dispose over a big network, they will also receive the required information in order to initiate change processes. I listened to you very closely just now, and at the end of what you said, I was wondering, what is she actually talking about? Is this about resilience or about the ability to be innovative? And I would like to pick up one point. A complex network of other actors and contact people or organizations can I rely on when it comes to create new things together? And of course, this is one substantial element that is quite essential to have to promote the ability to innovate. And after this crisis, after this pandemic, at least, we've been hearing those voices, people asking to strengthen the ability to innovate in companies. So we have those two abstract terms, resilience and ability to innovate. What's their relationship? They are very similar, you're right. When it comes to the ability to innovate, it's about the competencies of the employees, what is their work environment like, the social capital of different companies. This is very similar. So when we look at the ability to innovate, something that is important is that it's not just about the the quantity of competencies at the employees, but also the diversity. So if you have a diverse range of competencies, then of course the employees are in a position to include perspectives that are not quite as common within the company, but which can be very helpful within a crisis to find new paths and find new solutions. Speaking of the ability to innovate, that is similar to resilience. Of course, you have the ability to innovate as a company, but also on a personal level. Again, this can be a personal trait. Am I open to innovation or not? And just as is the case with resilient companies, resilient companies tend to attract resilient individuals because they have shared values that are congruent, and those companies able to innovate, they tend to attract people open to innovations. If there is a key to the ability of innovations, is the diversity of competencies which are actually present at a certain place, then the competencies of the presenters today, I think that the people present here are very much able to innovate. I think this is a very encouraging signal, and we will see what we can take away from this. But now, this is my segue in any case. You worked on a study for the Ministry of Work. You looked at what the pandemic did to companies. How does it change the cooperation, especially within the context of digital technologies? Now, in this audience, if I have a look around, I think there are certain individuals who have carried out similar studies, other people who might not exactly know what we're talking about. But what's your approach with such a study? As a team, you started by trying to look into the practical part of a company. We looked at different industries. We entered those industries, and in those industries, we would pick out 4 companies or 4 institutions. We entered them. We carried out interviews with the individuals, with one representative of the management, one representative of employees, in order to hear from both sides and to include both perspectives. So we spoke to the employees and the management at 2 different points during the winter of 2021, and the second interview happened during spring of 2021, in order to also consider the development over time. I don't know if any of you have participated in this. We didn't just submit a survey where people would tick certain boxes, but rather we asked them open questions. We conducted interviews with people. We were interested in many different aspects, so it wasn't quite that easy to summarize this in a nutshell. The first thing we asked them was what was the central transformation process which they were engaged in before the pandemic, that they had already initiated. Things came up in healthcare, for instance. The introduction of digital documentation, that was important, but also having collective bargaining agreements. Also when it comes to just retail, they were moving places, they were actually moving the shop, for instance. It was quite a broad range of different topics of transformation. And then we carried on asking them, how has this continued during the pandemic? Were you able to continue these transformation processes? Were you able to accelerate them? Were you able to improve them? Were you able to modify them? Most of them were stopped. Or if they were stopped, if you were able to improve them, what kind of resources did you need? What did these companies have which others didn't? I think that was the main question that we had. And then more generally, we asked them, what kind of resources did you tap into in order to make it through the pandemic? Because the pandemic was characterized by very quick changes that employees and the companies had to react to. I don't want to spoil anything, but new communication channels enabling people to react quickly. I mean, that was of the essence. Those were just a few aspects. I can't, go into all of the details, but you have the study available for free online, actually. So if anybody's interested, just look it up. One point that you addressed in your study was the point competencies. The fact that this plays an important role for the adaptability of companies when it comes to adopting new technologies and how to handle them. Now, competencies, of course, that's a huge term, but more specifically, what kind of competencies were required for the companies during the crisis and during the different processes of transformation, and why? First of all, we need to define the term. We have professional competencies and personal competencies. What we found, for instance, on the professional side was IT, digital sovereignty. We heard something about that, the effects of digital sovereignty as well. All of those people equipped with the right set of tools, if you will, and people having that own initiative to independently look for quick solutions, look for a quick fix. That was of the essence as well. This was a social competence, openness, being open for innovation. On a managerial level, for the executives, it was important to be able to communicate properly. So, communication, really. Professor Kaufeld also mentioned that you needed this motivating way of communicating. I can't quite remember the term that she used, but that was right on the spot. How do I communicate changes? How do I communicate these things which are uncomfortable, of course, for employees during the pandemic? How do I communicate it in a way that it becomes something that also entails new chances? Or do I communicate it in a way that, well, I mean, this sucks, but it has to be done? Well, so there's some ability to communicate things in a positive way. I mean, empathy also, that was of paramount importance. There's different relationships of companies within companies and institutions when it came to the question of quick promotions, for instance, which was important in healthcare, for example. It was important for people or companies to find cooperation partners and be able to engage in a quick exchange. Or if I stick with healthcare, we had institutions that were in a very good position. They had they were quickly able to find free slots, free beds, for instance. So that was important. And then this development of new communication channels or communication structures as well. This is something that we found. This is one of the insights that we gained, moving away from those standardized communication channels where it's possible, where you can't always do it. You have to adhere to certain processes. But wherever communication was made more flexible, more towards interprofessional communication, better and faster communication on a broad level. I mean, we had one institution that said, well, we now have a crisis plan ready. We can communicate it to everyone very quickly. They also used a term from crisis management to be proactive planning, proactive actions, proactive communication as well. And another important aspect, of course, was the communication which allowed people to participate in it. Whenever people were in an uncomfortable situation, to involve everyone, to explain the situation to them, and to get everyone on board, really. I have one more question, but this might be a bit of a challenge to you as well. We understand this from the point which you mentioned just now. Those are some very complex results. So it depends on what kind of empiric knowledge which you had. Basically, you did a very broad deep dive, if you will, into the German work society, if we can call it that. So if you could give us a two-sentence summary, what is your conclusion from this deep dive? You came back to the surface, you take off your goggles, and you tell us, what did you see? What was down there? All I can say is, it depends. If I get back to this new form of communication, these new communication channels, we were able to answer this question to an extent which I try to explain to you by the use of my example when it comes to video conference calls. You know, certain companies found to be very positive. It helped people with their time management. It helped them have a family alongside their jobs. In other cases, this was perceived as a risk, as social control, and a high density of work. So with this study, we were able to show that that entirely depends on what resources the company has at the disposition, which can be connected to this term of resilience, openness for changes, an openness when it comes to their company culture. How do you communicate changes? Are they communicated in an open and transparent manner? This is just one trait that really makes a difference, whether this is perceived positively or negatively, or whether the implementation is positive or negative and can entail positive change. There were some open questions too, which of course we couldn't answer all questions in that study, but we saw certain aspects which weren't part of our focus, but which might be important, which should be mentioned in this context. Professor Kaufeld also mentioned these demographic change, for instance, is another important issue that is within a transformation process. This is not something that we took a deep dive into, but we had one particular company as part of the study who said that their core business was to be extended, and what they tried was that they moved away from a scarcity of skilled laborers and they tried to recruit them abroad. And they described the challenges that they faced, also in terms of red tape, the requirements by the authorities. You had people coming to them from abroad. They needed to be integrated. That company, they made a huge effort, but maybe the overall work environment wasn't quite conducive, but everything connected to the scarcity of skilled labor, that is something that companies now need to look into as another important transformation process. And at the same time, this demographic change, of course, has another side to it, diversity. This was another result that we were able to show, that a high degree of diversity within your employees is actually something positive. So this allows us to counteract this scarcity of skilled labor, which can also entail disadvantages or advantages. So, we should conduct further studies in order to look into this. Diversity. Also, when it comes to competencies, this is something that you mentioned. This helps the resilience and the ability to innovate for companies. Thank you so much. If I look at the time constraints, I think we have time for one question. But first of all, a big round of applause. Thank you very much for giving us your insights into this study.